All right, I think we're good to go. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Hult International Business School and Admit Master Tackle the GMAT webinar. Tonight, we're going to be covering the verbal section of the GMAT. The math section of the GMAT was covered about a month ago, and a link to that webinar will be available, as will a recording to this evening's webinar will be available to you via email tomorrow. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nemis Nemakonde, and I am the Director of Enrollment at Hult International Business School. We are doing this in conjunction with Admit Master. This evening, like I said, we'll be covering the verbal section of the GMAT. We're going to, my colleague Sergey Cook will be covering that. Sergey is a senior trainer with Admit Master. Hult has worked with Admit Master for a long period of time, and we've seen a lot of great results come from the students who have worked with Admit Master. After Sergey has gone through the our verbal section and tactics on how to tackle that, I'll be doing an overview on Hult, the business school, as well as our admissions process and GMAT tips here at Hult. Sergey, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Nemes, for this introduction. Hi, everyone. So my name is Sergey. I'll introduce myself just in a moment. But here is what we are going to do tonight. Tonight is really all about the verbal section. We've covered the math section about a month ago. We'll get into some different things about the GMAT tonight as well, and we'll spend the majority of the time talking about this verbal section. And if you've ever been to my classes, you probably know that, and this is really a very short webinar. Usually the majority of our classes are 4 hours long, and many times people would come to our class after a very long work day, and they would spend 4 hours in class, and many of them would comment that they have more energy at the end of the class than they had at the beginning of the class, even though our classes end at 10 p.m. So we're gonna keep this class fun. We're going to keep it engaging. Unfortunately, I cannot see you, so I'd like to ask you to participate yourself. These questions, try to go through them, and then, of course, we'll go through them together. Heard of a concept? I really am a big believer that we all should learn for our whole life, because really this is what life is all about. It's all about learning new things, about having fun as you're learning. And of course, if you stay within the comfort zone for very long, you're not really going to learn anything. So you've joined this class tonight, and I want to take you outside of your comfort zone a little bit, put you in the learning zone. And for that, I'll give you a question to do. This would be a typical critical GMAT question. This question will have an argument. You'll have a question about the argument. I'll give you some time to think about what you think the answer might be, and then we'll break it down together. So if you're ready, here's the question. All right, so what do you think? What is the answer? What kind of role does this boldface statement play? Or I want to ask you a different question. Who is already reading this question the second time? You can type in the chat box. So I've given you a question. It's certainly a very confusing question, or the text is very confusing. It's about philosophy. It's about ethics. And how much do you need to know about philosophy if you're about to go to a business school? Well, how much do you need to know about ethics? Well, that's a different question. But certainly not this type of ethics, or not this type of a debate. So let me show you the answer choices. Maybe the answer choices are going to help you figure out what the answer is. Ready? So what do you think? Do the answer choices help? Or are they even more confusing than the passage itself? So if you don't really know what to look for, when you look at this passage, your eyes are just going to glance over it and you'll read it a few times. You'll be completely lost. And then you'll try to see what the answers choices are saying. And you'll try to make sense of it. But if you know what to look for, here's how you're going to look at this passage. You're going to say, okay, so this person, ethicist, begins by saying it would be a mistake to say something. So what this means is this person is claiming that somebody is wrong and this person is right. And that's a pretty bold claim. And if somebody is making this claim, there will always be the main claim of the argument. Everything else that the author is saying is going to be structured to support the claim that I'm right and other people are wrong. Now, another thing is the bold-faced part. The question is really asking us about the role of the bolded part of the sentence. So let's look at the bolded part. It begins with the words "for although it is true," and then the author is making another statement. So again, if you think about this, the author really agrees with the bolded part. He does say it's true. He may disagree with somebody's opinion, but the bolded part is something he does agree with. Well, let's see if just this analysis, we still don't really understand what this passage is trying to say, but we do know that the main claim is these people are wrong, I'm right, and that the bolded part statement is something the author does agree with. Let's see if this will help us answer the question. Let's look at the answer choice C. C says it is a faulty claim. Well, we can immediately eliminate the answer choice because we know that, first of all, it's not a claim, and second of all, the author does agree with it. So we can eliminate C. D, it is according to the argument a commonly held opinion that's nevertheless false. Again, the author does agree with it. Again, remember the question was about the bolded part. So D is also wrong. Let's take a look at E. It reports an observation that the argument claims is false. Again, the author does not believe it's false. He does believe it's true. That eliminates E as well. So we're down to two answer choices, just because we understood what's a claim and because we saw these words at the beginning of the bolded part. Now let's take a look at answer choice A. It seems shorter, so maybe we should deal with it first. It is a claim for which an argument attempts to provide justification. Again, we said the main claim is these people are wrong, I'm right. It wasn't the bolded part, and the question is about the bolded part. So A cannot be the right answer, B has to be the right answer. So see, this is the type of analysis that you would do if you know what to look for. And this is how you're going to actually read this passage. You're going to not pay attention to what's not important, which is the subject matter, and you will pay attention to what is important, which is the structure of an argument. So I hope you enjoyed this question. I'm curious, if you got this question right, please type in the chat box that you did get it right, and we'll send some kudos to you. Let's talk very briefly about the GMAT. What is the GMAT? Now, the GMAT stands for the Graduate Management Admission Test. It's a standardized admission test for any sort of a graduate business degree. It could be an MBA, a PhD, Master of Finance, accounting, and so on. It is accepted, it's a universally accepted test. It's accepted by a lot of different programs worldwide, and it's really a way to compare you with other applicants. That's why business schools pay a lot of attention to this exam, because it really lets them compare everyone on a level playing field. Let's talk about the format of the exam. Now, the exam consists of 4 sections. An AAA, which is analysis of an argument, which is a typed essay that you have to type on the screen. Integrated reasoning, which is essentially 12 mini business cases, and you have approximately 2.5 minutes for each business case. Then you have the quantitative section, which is essentially math. That's something we were talking about 4 weeks ago. 37 questions, 75 minutes. And then the verbal section, which is a section that we're going to be talking about today. 41 questions, 75 minutes, approximately 1 minute and 49 seconds per question. As you probably know, each of these sections is going to be scored. Each section is scored separately. And the last 2 sections that I mentioned here, quantitative and verbal, are going to contribute towards your total score, 200 to 800. So I'm also curious if you can just type in the chat box, what score would you like to get? I would just like to know what you guys are looking for, and we'll make sure to address this towards the end of this webinar. Let me share very quickly a little bit about myself. As Nema said, I am a 99% GMAT instructor. I have been teaching the GMAT for a number of years now. I have scored very highly on the GMAT myself. I have not started as a 99% GMAT instructor. In fact, I didn't even like math. I didn't even like studying when I was in junior school. But at some point, I got really lucky with some amazing teachers who taught me how to think differently. They essentially said, look, there's this school curriculum that you need to learn, but just so you know, there's a better way to approach problems. There is a better way to look at the learning process. And if you're willing to stay after the class, we will help you. And I'm really eternally grateful to these teachers. And as a result, I was able to get 3 university degrees. My first 2 degrees are in rocket science. So I was working on algorithms to send rockets into space for a few years. And then I decided that I need something more down to earth. And I decided to get my MBA. Just like everybody else, when you need to do an MBA, of course, you need to do your GMAT. I have done my GMAT exam. I scored 750 after about 2 weeks of studying. And the reason why I'm telling this is not to impress you, but it actually impresses me every time I say it. I think it's pretty cool. Certainly, if you get a score this high, you can brag about it. But another reason why I'm sharing this is that I'm just a normal guy. I wasn't born as a 99th percentile GMAT guy. I just learned the right skills very early. So when it came the time to take the GMAT, I already had these skills. All I had to do is learn how to apply them for the GMAT. Now, of course, I did get my MBA, I graduated on top of my class. I did get a corporate job, just like everybody else would like to get after you graduate from a business school. But then at some point, I've decided that I need something better for myself, and that I wanted to help more people. And as a result, I started teaching the GMAT. And really the way we teach the GMAT is very different. We focus a lot on experiential learning, on developing the right skills, the right way to think, or the different way to think. The GMAT's not really about knowing grammar rules. It's not really about knowing simple math formulas. It is really all about thinking differently. We call it thinking like a CEO, because if you want to go to a business school, and the dream job of almost everybody who goes to business school is to become a CEO, is a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or CEO of maybe your own company, then why not learn how CEOs think at the very, very beginning of your journey, which is right now studying for the GMAT. Well, I'm sure you didn't come here to learn about me, but I wanted to mention something very, very important. Like I mentioned, I'm just a normal guy. I just learned the right skills. And we've seen this over and over again, that if you really put your heart to developing this skill, and if you really recognize that the GMAT is not the normal exam. It's not about learning formulas. It is about having these right problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, decision-making skills, time management skills. You can do exceptionally well, and there's virtually no limit to how well you can do on a test. Well, there is a limit. You can't really go above 800. That's the highest score, but you can go very, very far. And I've shown you different examples in a previous webinar. For example, this gentleman, he's done exceptionally well in the quant section. He's shown a lot of improvement. But even in the verbal, when he came to our course, he was already at the top 1%. He improved even further from 44 to 47, which is an exceptionally high score. It's like 0.001%. Some of the other candidates come and they say, I'm already relatively strong, let's say in quant, and I know how to do these questions, but I know that I need to do them faster. And as I'm getting to harder problems, I need to have the confidence and the right strategies and the right approach to deal with these problems. So even if you are at 600 and above, you can go even higher. And then once you reach these levels, then you could possibly get some better scholarships. You will even have better opportunities when you graduate from a business school, because a lot of employers are looking at your GMAT scores once you graduate. So let me ask you a question, and it's kind of a rhetorical question. I think you wouldn't be here if the answer to this question would be no. But would you like to be one of these success stories and get offers from business schools you really want to go to and get scholarships? Because really, you're going through this process, and it is going to be a difficult process. Getting into a business school, then going through your MBA program. But ultimately, you can enjoy this process, and you can enjoy the learning process as well as get the most out of it. You might as well enjoy it since you've decided to do it. So let's talk about verbal. Let's talk about the verbal section. This is really what we came here today for. Now, let's remember some of the basics of the verbal section. As you already know by now, 41 questions, 75 minutes. The average time is about 1 minute 40, it's a little bit more, 1 minute 49, but trust me, the 4 seconds are not really going to help you that much. So you want to manage your time properly, about 1 minute 45 seconds. And there are 3 question types on the verbal section: sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. So before we look at these question types and the different strategies for them, I want to ask you, why do you think some people believe that the verbal section is hard? So again, please type in the chat box if you do think the verbal section is hard, or why do some people believe that the verbal section is hard? Yeah, exactly. Somebody said boring topics. Absolutely. Boring, fatigue, English is not the first language. Lots of reading, lots of grammar rules. Exactly, you're overthinking the material. You don't focus, or you do focus, but you focus on the wrong things. We don't talk good. Right? There are many things that you haven't seen before. I promise some of you are going to be talking gooder. Some of you are going to be the goodest talkers. Right? Many of us focus on how things or how certain sentences sound right. But again, the GMAT tries to exploit it because we don't really talk very well. Of course, yeah, the speed, some of the logical thinking. Many of us haven't learned how to think logically. And when you read a reading comprehension passage, sometimes it's hard to understand what's really logical about this passage. It kind of seems quite illogical sometimes. The GMAT uses lots of complex words, the words that are intended to throw you off. They use complex passages, argument structures. Remember, a lot of these reading comprehension passages were adapted from some scientific journals, so it's really hard to focus on them. You have limited time, as you already said. On the reading comprehension question, you have several questions, but only one at a time. So you don't really know what's coming. If you're trying to focus on the question that's in front of you, maybe you would have missed something that would come in a different question. So there are many reasons, and I'm really glad that nobody mentioned this reason: unfamiliar topics. That is really not something you need to be worrying about, because, I mean, think about this. GMAT is an exam to get into a business school, but they almost never ask you questions about the business. In fact, they don't even test you on how well you know business. That's why you're trying to get into business school. So the things they're going to test you on are microbiology, chemistry, the history of medieval canon lawyer associations. What are you supposed to know as a future business student about microbiology? Well, nothing. And that's why the topics are not important. So if the topics are not important, then what is important? Well, what is important is the structure. It's really about, imagine you're a future manager or you're a consultant. You walk into a new company. You don't really know all the intricacies about how they do things, but you do understand that everything they do has to follow a certain structure. And when it comes to the GMAT, it's really all about, and the verbal section is even more important to understand the structure. There's a certain structure of a sentence, certain structure of an argument, and a structure of a passage that you need to understand. And if you don't really understand this, as you get into a passage, you're focusing like some of you mentioned, you begin to focus on lots of details in the passage, and you can really get lost in these details. So let's take a look at what is actually the structure. Let's start with the structure of a sentence. So the sentence correction is one of the question types on the verbal section. It is the most common question type. So you're going to see the most questions that you're going to see on the verbal section are going to be sentence correction questions. So sentence correction is all about these three things. It's about grammar, which grammar is essentially the structure of the English language. It's also about the meaning, and it's about the style. Ultimately, you need to pick an answer that's clear and concise. It's grammatically correct, but it's also very clear in its expression. As a future manager, you need to be able to communicate very, very well, and that's what the GMAT is testing in the sentence correction question types. So remember, even though it's called sentence correction, you are really not there to correct sentences. And the reason why you're not there to correct the sentences is there is no perfect way to write a sentence. You can literally spend an hour trying to write and rewrite the sentence, and you may still not have the perfect sentence. So your job is really to find the best written sentence out of the options that are given to you. And as you're doing this, you really need first and foremost to focus on the structure. Really focus on the structure of the sentence. Don't try to focus on what sounds right. Make sure that you pick an answer that follows the right structure. There are lots of structural rules on the verbal section, lots of structural rules in the English grammar. But remember, I mean, English as a language has been created out of multiple languages. So there are almost as many exceptions in English as there are rules. So you really want to stay focused, especially if you want to prepare for the GMAT in an efficient manner. You want to focus on what's really important. Now, yes, you do need to know the difference between the words father and further on the GMAT, but how important is that part? There's something that are a lot more important. What's very, very important to understand is that in every sentence in the English language, you need to have two things. If you don't have these two things in a sentence, this is not a sentence in the English language. This is not true about other languages, by the way. But in English, you must have two things. Number one, you must have a subject. This is whom the sentence is about. You also must have a verb. This is a subject action or a state of being. So you must have a subject, you must have a verb. If one of them is missing, this is called a sentence fragment. It is never going to be the right answer on the GMAT because it's not the complete sentence. Now, not only you must have a subject and you must have a verb, but also they must agree with each other. So what does it mean agree? It doesn't necessarily mean that they sit around the table and try to agree on something. No, agree means they agree in number. That's the only agreement that's tested on the GMAT. So what this means is that singular subjects require singular verbs and plural subjects require plural verbs. I think that kind of sounds pretty obvious, right? If you're talking about somebody in single terms, then you would use a singular verb. So let's do a quick exercise. I'll give you a few sentences. Spend about 30 seconds and pick the right answer for each one of these sentences. Okay, let's talk about these. Birds sing very loudly. Birds are plural, sing are singular. A bird sings. Again, a bird, singular, sings, also singular. What you've noticed is that in the English language, usually singular nouns don't have an S at the end, but singular verbs do. Plural nouns usually have an S. Plural verbs usually don't. Of course, there are exceptions. Look at number 3. Children play. Children is plural, even though it doesn't have an S. Let's take a look at the next one. John, despite advice from his friends, is studying for the GMAT by himself. Of course, it is. John is singular. Why did they have these words, despite advice from his friends? Just to throw us off, because they're hoping we're going to lose our focus and we are going to think, oh, friends, it has to be are, right? But really, John here is the subject. Let's take a look at the next one. No Man's Land, the area between opposing trenches in World War I, was, again, the subject here is land. And the area between the opposing trenches in World War I is what's called a modifier. Again, it's there just to throw us off. There is or are reasons. Well, there are reasons, of course. The subject here is reasons. This is an inverted sentence. They put the verb in front of a subject, again, to throw us off. Usually in the English language, we would put a subject first and a verb second. All right, well, I'm really glad you got most of these right. Let's look at the next set of exercises. I'll give you another 30 seconds to look at 6 more sentences. Well, this sounds very easy as well, right? The crowd at the concert is very loud. The crowd is what's called a collective noun. We are talking about the crowd as a whole, not individual people in the crowd. That's why we need to have is. People from around the world now have an opportunity to learn GMAT skills online. Again, why is it have? Even though we use another collective noun, people, but people is a plural collective noun, whereas the crowd was singular. We still talk about people as individual entities and the crowd as a whole. That's why we use a plural verb. Melissa and Katie live in Boston. Now, Melissa and Katie is what's called a compound noun. Melissa and Katie is a subject. Both of them are a subject. It's plural. That's why we need to use live. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I think some of you may have gotten it incorrectly. Jason, as well as his 2 friends, is or are. So some of you said it's are. Actually not. The right answer is Jason, as well as his 2 friends, is taking a GMAT prep course. Now, you might be surprised. Why is it is? We're talking about his 2 friends, and it's Jason and his 2 friends. So think about, what is the subject here? The subject here is Jason. It's not Jason as well as his 2 friends. His 2 friends are actually not part of the subject at all. His 2 friends are not doing anything in this sentence. Jason is doing something. And as well as his 2 friends are simply there to describe Jason, to essentially modify Jason. Also, something that you may want to remember is that we said the compound noun is when we put together a few nouns. Essentially, we make a list, like Melissa and Katie. While the only word that could be used to create a list is the word and, as well as is not the word that's used to create a list. That's why Jason, as well as his 2 friends, is not a compound noun. Jason is a subject. Jason, as well as his 2 friends, is taking a GMAT prep course. Let's take a look at the next one. Neither my brothers nor my sister has or have ever been to London. Again, you might be surprised to know that the right answer here is has and not have. The reason why it has is because there's what's called the proximity rule. If you use the construction neither nor or either or, then you need to make sure that the verb agrees with the noun that's closest to it. Neither my brothers nor my sister. Sister is singular. We need to use has and not have. If we were to invert this sentence, if we were to say, for example, have my brothers or my sister, well, now have is closer to the brothers, and now we need to use have. This is a very strange rule. Most of us don't really use it properly. Some of you asking, well, what's wrong with 10? Like we said, well, Jason as well as his two friends, as well as his two friends is a modifier to Jason. Again, it's a little counterintuitive, but as well as is not a structure that's used to create a list. That's why Jason is the subject. And the reason why the proximity rule doesn't apply to number 1 is that we don't have the neither nor, either or construction. Here, really, Jason is the only subject, as well as his two friends have absolutely nothing to do with our subject. It simply is modifying Jason. So the proximity rule really works when we have these correlative conjunctions, neither nor, either or. And finally, the board of directors has or have decided. Again, seems like, well, the board of directors, right? Directors have decided. No, that's not true. It's the board. Now, the board of directors. The board of directors is what's called a noun phrase. So it's a noun, but it's a phrase. It's a collection of words that is acting as a noun. And really, our verb must agree with what's before the of, right? The board of director, board is a collective noun. Just like we said, the crowd is singular, the board is singular as well. That's why the board has decided. Well, I hope you enjoyed this exercise. The subject-verb agreement sounds really easy, right? Sounds super easy, but the GMAT will always find a way to use these little-known rules that we don't really use as in spoken language. That's why the sound right strategy is not a very good strategy, because most of us, even though you may speak a very good English, you probably don't speak with the rules of the standard written English, and that's really what the GMAT is testing, right? So sounds easy, if only the GMAT were this easy. Right? What do you think about this sentence? Is this a good sentence? Is everything correct? Well, it is. Right? You're saying, yes, was GMAT singular? Would you be surprised to know that this sentence is actually perfectly correct? And again, there is something that GMAT testing sometimes. This is a construction that's called the subjunctive mood. When the GMAT is talking about something that's hypothetical, something that's not true, we need to use were instead of was. Again, something we don't use in our everyday life. So what you've already been able to see now with the sentence correction is that there are some rules. Most of these rules are rules that are very specific, or at least there is a way to test them in a very specific manner for the rules of the written English. And there are a lot of potential rules, but they're really only about 9 or 10 rules that are tested all the time. And subject-verb agreement is the most important of them all. So you really need to master these rules if you want to do very well in sentence correction. Now let's talk about other things. Let's talk about the next section. Let's talk about critical reasoning. And critical reasoning is really all about arguments. Now let me ask you a question. What is an argument? Well, let me give you 2 definitions from the online dictionary. Definition number 1, an argument is an exchange of diverging and opposite views, typically a heated or angry one. And the definition number 2, it's a collection of statements that outlines a point and the reasons behind that point in a well-reasoned manner. What do you think is an argument on the GMAT? Well, I'm sure that you probably realized by now, it is, of course, number 2. So it's not people arguing. It is really a well-structured, or maybe sometimes poorly structured argument where you do have a main point and you also have some sort of reasons behind that main point. So as a result, every argument must have 2 things. Number 1, a conclusion, which we also sometimes call a claim, which is really the main point or the idea behind the argument. Let me give you an example. While reading about Socrates, I began thinking about mortality. This is probably one of the oldest arguments that exists in our humanity. This made me realize that if Socrates is a man, then Socrates must be mortal. The fact that Socrates must be mortal is something I'm trying to communicate. That is my claim. That's something I'm trying to support. That is the main point. That's why we call it the conclusion. Another thing that must exist in an argument, for this to be an argument, is some sort of evidence. If I'm simply saying Socrates must be mortal, but I don't provide any backup, it's not really an argument. It's simply a statement, or it's what the GMAT calls an unsupported claim. So the evidence is, why do we believe this? And in this argument, the evidence was, if Socrates is a man, that's why we believe that Socrates must be mortal, because we know he's a man. And an argument can also contain some background information. For example, that the whole first part that I was reading about Socrates and I was thinking about Socrates, it's not really that important. But it is there to create a context for my argument. Now, there are different ways to structure an argument. For example, we can say Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. We can put the evidence first, the conclusion second. Sometimes we put the conclusion first. For example, Socrates is mortal. And then we provide evidence. After all, which is, by the way, the word that signals to us that evidence is coming, Socrates is a man. We can also use what's actually very common on the exams, such as the GMAT and also the LSAT, which is really all about logical thinking and arguments, which is called the contrasted opinion. A view is held by some that Socrates is immortal. These people are wrong, since Socrates is a man. Again, that's another way to create an argument. All of these three structures really talk about the same thing. So for the purposes of our discussion, for the purposes of an argument on the GMAT, that's exactly the same argument. We're just organizing it in a different way. And what's even more important is if I show you these three arguments, chemical X is a poison, therefore it's harmful, chemical X is harmful, after all it's a poison, or someone said that chemical X is not harmful, this person is wrong because chemical X is a poison. Again, exactly the same argument, right? Because remember, we don't really care that much about the content. Like, how much do you need to know about chemicals or Socrates or mortality for that matter? But we do care about the structure. And the structure of these arguments is exactly the same as the ones that we've seen before. Another thing that's very important to understand about the arguments is that there are two things in the arguments that kind of a lot of people pay attention to. One of them is the truth, another one is logic. The truth of an argument is whether you believe what the author is saying. And the logic is whether the argument is structured in a very logical manner, where really the conclusion flows and is supported very well by the evidence. Let me give you an example. What do you think about this argument? Grass is always purple. And everything that's purple can speak Latin. Therefore, grass can speak Latin. What do you think? Good argument, bad argument? Well, actually, for the purpose of the GMAT, this is a perfectly sound argument, even though it sounds absolutely ridiculous. It's certainly not true, but the logic of this argument is bulletproof. It's something called a syllogism. It is a very, very sound argument, even though it's not a true argument. So if you ever find yourself trying to doubt the truth of an argument, you're doing something wrong. You really need to focus on the logic, on the structure of an argument. Well, let's talk about reading comprehension then. Because what is reading comprehension all about? Again, many people are thinking, well, I need to be able to read and really comprehend. I need to read very carefully. I need to understand every little detail, or I need to understand the subject matter. Well, again, no. This is not what it's really all about. You don't need to understand molecular biology if the subject matter is molecular biology. It's all about reading with purpose. So if you find yourself focusing on the subject matter, you are doing something wrong. And if you find yourself focusing on very little details and all the small details in the passage, you're also doing something wrong. Because there are lots of details, and because the passages are fairly long, There could be many details that are not relevant to the questions that you're going to be asked after this passage. So what you need to do instead is focus really on how the author is making a point, not what the author is saying, how the author is saying it. Any prior knowledge of the subject matter is really not required, because everything you need to know about the subject matter is right in front of you. In fact, if you do know something, it can play against you. Like if you do know that New York is a very large city, but in the passage they never say it, you can't use that information. Because maybe there's another little town somewhere in Mexico that's called New York. There's a very tiny little village. Maybe the passage is about that village. So don't bring your outside knowledge. Instead, you need to focus on what's the structure of an argument, how is the passage creating a narrative. Essentially, what's the story? What's the structure behind the story? Not what the story is trying to tell me. And to do that, it's helpful to understand what is a passage voice. It's essentially how the author is trying to communicate the message. Again, how, not what. And if you'd like an analogy, then there are essentially four main voices. So if you understand, if you really get into the head of the author, then you can say, okay, if I were an author, then what would I be doing? How would I be doing it? How would I be structuring it? Why am I writing this? Why am I saying this? And you as an author can play one of the four different roles. So let's run through them very quickly. Number one is the explainer. Essentially, I'm just trying to explain something. I'm not trying to bring my own opinion. I'm not trying to analyze it. I'm just trying to say, okay, here's this new theory. Here's what it is. And if you'd like an analogy, if you ever watch any courtroom dramas, somebody who is an explainer would be a court reporter. This person is not trying to say, well, this person's right and this person's wrong. I really like these comments. No, this person is just trying to say, okay, this person said this and that person said that, and that's it. The explainer role is very, very common in science passages. Now, the next role that you can take as an author is an investigator. An investigator is somebody who is critically analyzes a point of view, or several points of view, making sure that really everybody's voice is heard, making sure that we are highlighting all the positives or negatives, but this person does not actually make a decision. And in the common law system, at least in the criminal court, there would be a judge. The judge does not make a decision whether somebody is guilty or not guilty. The judge is simply there to ensure a fair trial. So there would be an investigator. The next person would be an analyst. An analyst would be critically analyzing this topic from different points of view, but then would actually make a recommendation and would say, on the balance, even though we've analyzed both of these perspectives, we think that the perspective A or the plan A is a better plan. And of course, in a court, this would be the jury. And finally, who else are we missing? Well, we are missing the arguer. This is somebody who argues for a particular point of view, usually against somebody else. And of course, this person is not trying to be fair. We call this person a biased person. And that would be somebody like a defendant, plaintiff, a lawyer, or a prosecutor. So now that you understand what's really the role of an author, then you are going to look at the passages a little bit differently. And when you approach the passages, you got to remember a few things. Number one, passage topics. There's 3 different topics: natural sciences, social sciences, and business-related topics will show up on the test. Usually the way the GMAT is structured is you will see all 3 throughout your exam. Most of the people see 4 passages, so they'll make sure that you see all 3. So as you are reading a passage, try to understand, well, what's the topic? Also, what's the voice of a passage? Is the author an explainer, investigator, an analyst, or an arguer? What's the purpose of each paragraph? How is the passage organized? Why am I, as an author, writing this? Why did I write this paragraph number 2? How does it support my main claim? Why is it important? And then, what's the primary purpose of the entire passage? Why did I write this? And trust me, it wasn't to make life miserable on the GMAT. All of these passages were adapted from scientific journals, usually from scientific journals. So why did I write this? What were I trying to say? Was I trying to explain something or to argue for something, to convince you about something? So as you're reading, this is what you should be paying attention to. And you should really begin reading every day. If you're trying to get into a business school, you need to be very well read. Read some well-written material. Some good sources are The Economist, Harvard Alumni Magazine, Scientific American. Also try to read some poorly written material, because a lot of the things that you're going to see, especially in the reading comprehension, remember, they were adapted from scientific journals. And scientists don't usually write something that's very eloquent. They use a lot of passive voice. But still, you're going to have to deal with it on a test. And also read material in your industry, and also read material is not in your industry. If you work in finance, don't just read things about finance. Read something from biology, because you really have to get used to it. And when you read, as we already talked about, don't read passively. Don't try to skim. At the same time, don't get bogged down in details and terminology. You really have to read actively. At the end of each paragraph, summarize the purpose of each paragraph, predict what's coming, focus on the structure, focus on the big picture, focus on what point is the author trying to get across. That's very, very important. So before we wrap up, I want to do one question with you. So I'll give you, again, about probably 45 seconds to read this passage. It's going to be a short passage, a critical reasoning question. And let me know what you think is the answer. All right, yes, some of you are typing up the answer. So let's see how we could possibly approach this question. It's a little bit of a tricky question, right? Some people are saying D, some people are saying B, some people are saying C. So let's take a look at this. Here's how some people are approaching these questions. They're going to say, okay, well, let's focus on what sounds right. Because we really, if we don't have any other way of doing these questions, so let's read the passage, let's read the question, let's read the answer choices. Many of you probably went through this process and have a hard time understanding what's going on. Now look at the answer choice and say, okay, so A sounds kind of weird, ceremonial drinking vessels. B seems familiar. Oh, that's an earthquake, AD 365. C sounds weird. What does it have to do with coins? D sounds weird, small statues. Stone inscription sounds weird. You're going to probably spend a little bit of time trying to reread it. If I gave you a little more time, we've probably gone a little bit back and forth. Make sure we read this, make sure we really don't understand what's going on, and then ultimately we're going to pick B anyway. And after about 4 minutes, we're going to say, okay, it's B, let's move on. Well, let's see if we learned a little bit about the strategy of doing these questions. Then you would probably know, let's go the strategy way, is you read the question first, and when you look at the question, you say, oh, it's a strengthening question. Yeah, it's what most strongly supports it. And then when you look at the passage, you say, okay, I'm going to read the passage and I'm going to identify what's the conclusion, what's the evidence, and then I'll find the answer choice that strengthens the conclusion. Now let's take a look at the answer choices. Well, A seems quite irrelevant. Ceremonial drinking vessel, what does it have to do with it? B strengthens the conclusion. We need to make sure it was the earthquake in AD 365. B tells us, yes, most histories mention it. That's great. It strengthens it. C seems irrelevant. Have to do with coins. D seems irrelevant. E seems irrelevant. You're going to pick B. 2 minutes. We follow a structure. We follow a process. There's only one problem. B is not the right answer. So what do we do? Well, let's take a look at what you really do if you didn't just learn the strategies, but you also have practiced a lot. You really recognized what's working, what's not working, how you can approach these questions. You look for what's hidden. You look for what's not said in the passage. So let's call it the mastery way. Well, you're going to start with the same approach. Read the question first. It's a strengthening question. Then you're going to read the passage, identify the conclusion and the evidence, and then you're going to say, oh, I need to pay attention to what is the author not saying. That's the assumption. The author is assuming it was that particular earthquake. We need to find some evidence that's suggesting to us, maybe not proving it, but suggesting that it was the earthquake in AD 365 that actually destroyed that town. Let's take a look at the answer choices. A does nothing. Before and after, doesn't really try to support it, doesn't really address our assumption in any way. B tells us something we already know. We already know there was a major earthquake because the passage says major earthquake known to have occurred. We already know that it occurred. Or C tells us or suggests that something really big happened. If a town stops minting coins, that means that the town is, well, there's some sort of a major disruption. And if we know there was a major disruption in AD 365, we also know there was an earthquake in AD 365. It makes it more likely that it was actually that earthquake that destroyed the town. Because we also know, by the way, that this town was destroyed by an earthquake. Because we know that there was a pattern of debris and collapsed buildings. So that leads us to answer choice C. We spend about 1 minute. We stop reading after we read C. We get the right answer. And what's important is that we already know what to look for when we start reading the questions. And also what's very important is that the answer choice C doesn't really prove that it was beyond any shadow of a doubt that earthquake. It could have been that some enemies came in and they destroyed the town, captured the town before the earthquake. Maybe they destroyed it. But it certainly makes it more likely. And that's really all we care about. So I hope you enjoyed this question. Let's now really talk, again, very briefly about, well, where do I go from here? How do I really approach this monster called the GMAT? How do I teach myself how to think logically? To think how the GMAT wants me to think. Let me ask you a question. Well, why is B wrong? Well, because B tells us something we already know. That's why it's wrong. So when we think about knowledge, well, knowledge is power. What do you think? Is knowledge power? Well, I mean, knowledge used to be power, right? Imagine, and I mean, the summer is almost over here in North America, or at least in the northern part of North America. But in summer, I love to sail a boat, and there's lots of theory on how to sail a boat. So I can give you lots of the knowledge on how to sail a boat, but then imagine you and I are trying to get into a boat. Who's going to be more successful, right? It's somebody who has the knowledge or somebody who has the skills. That's really what the currency of the 21st century is. Knowledge is commoditized. You can gain knowledge by just typing up a query or even saying a query into a Google phone or an Apple phone. But the skills, your ability to apply that knowledge is really something that is very prized and very valuable. And when you're thinking about the GMAT, again, the GMAT is an exam, but is it an exam of knowledge? Let's take a look at the official definition from the GMAT. The GMAT is saying, rather than testing your knowledge of business or any other subject matter, the GMAT exam measures higher order reasoning skills that really matter in the 21st century. You do need to know some basic knowledge, but you need to demonstrate different types of reasoning skills. And again, who said this? Not me, the GMAT. The people who created the test, they're saying, that's all about the skills. Let me give you another analogy, and I'm sure you're going to like it, or maybe hate this analogy, but you probably know this gentleman, Warren Buffett. This gentleman is making $1.3 million an hour even when he sleeps. Do you think he has a very, very good memory? Or maybe compared to some of the younger people. But do you think he has the right skills to make the right decisions? Right? That's really what's important. And when a lot of people, they're approaching this test as if it's a knowledge-based test. So they would say, okay, well, I need to get this knowledge. I need to get these resources. And I need to try to memorize what's in these books. Right? And then when they realize, well, this doesn't really get them to a very high score, all they do is they're just saying, I need more books, and I need more and more books because maybe that book wasn't good enough. And then they feel completely overwhelmed with the number of books. And then many of them even give up because they don't see the progress. And that's why the average score on the GMAT, the average score in the industry is about 550, is because you can only go that far by learning the knowledge. Beyond that, you need to start developing skills. And we here at Admit Master have the reliable data about what would you possibly get if you develop the right skills. Because we teach people the right skills in our classes and also in our online classes, and we track the progress. And our program is very high touch, so we work with a lot of our students, our clients, one-on-one. That's why we know what scores they get. And the average of our clients is 670. So it is quite a bit higher than the average. And again, that's a testament to how much more important are the skills compared to the knowledge. So ladies and gentlemen, if you believe you are your biggest asset, it's really, we are lifelong learners, and the best investment you can make is investment in yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here this evening. When you're approaching a new game, if you ask not just how to play the game, but how do I really win this game? And if you believe that learning should be fun, because, I mean, literally, learning should be fun, then you need skills-based training. Now, we here at Admit Master provide in-person skills-based training in Toronto, New York, Chicago, and Montreal, and anywhere else online. It's an intensive program. It's 50+ hours spread over about 6 weeks. We give you 3 hours of private tutoring. We include study materials. You can retake this class for free for 1 year. And it's also fairly affordable if you compare it with other programs as well. Given the fact that this program is very advanced, and for the amount of hours and the amount of personal support, again, if you compare it with some of the competing programs, then you'll find it does provide a much better value. We're a medium-sized company. We're not a large company such as some of the other ones, but we are able to provide them for a much more personalized support and a much greater value. And also, they're very advanced type of a training that will come with a lot of personalized attention. And we also wanted to do something special for you, especially if you've stayed here all the way till the end of our webinar, is that we will give you a $100 discount of any one of our courses if you quote this promo code. And of course, you'll only know this code if you stayed till the end. So ladies and gentlemen, if there's anything in life that you don't get, then there's usually an excuse. An excuse could be, well, I don't really have the time. I want to get this done in 4 weeks. But remember something that's very, very important. We all have the same amount of time. The only way to get things done quicker is to know a shortcut. That's the same thing you can do on the GMAT. There's really no way to do things the long way, but quicker. You'll just make careless mistakes. You need to know how to do less, how to take this shortcut. When it comes to studying also, you gotta make sure you allocate your time properly. And if you subscribe to some of these social media websites where a lot of people go that study for the GMAT, you will probably read a lot of inspirational stories. I love some of these stories. Somebody would share that this person studied for 7 years. Now, how long do you want to study? And now some of you are saying, look, I really want to get a very high score and I want to invest in my education, but I don't really have the money. Maybe I don't have the money for my MBA. Maybe I don't have the money to study for my GMAT. Well, this kind of like to say, I'm about to invest in an MBA program, which is, let's say, an expensive car, and don't really have the money for the gas. Something's going to help me drive this car. Something that's going to help me get into this program. It's not really a very good logic, right? We're talking about logical thinking today. And finally, some people are saying, well, I don't really believe I can do it. Well, here, I can't really help you. Well, I can, honestly. I can if you reach out to me one-on-one, and we can talk about your confidence, we can talk about your approach, and we can talk about why MBA is really that important for you. And then we could see what would you really need to maybe gain enough confidence to go through this process, because that's really what the most important thing is. If you approach this with a lot of reasoning behind it, if you really know why you want to do an MBA, you will find a way. And my role here was really to show you the door. You're the one who has to go through it. Just like, of course, Morpheus told to Neo. So ladies and gentlemen, the choice is yours. You can go through this process. And if you really don't know where to start, what I would recommend, go on our website, admitmaster.com/free test, and take a diagnostic test. Find out where you are. You're going to learn a lot more about, first of all, yourself, and secondly, about the GMAT. And as a bonus, we'll give you a 7-day free trial of our learning platform. You don't need any credit card, just go online, you sign up with your email address and your name, and we'll send you a link. You can use that platform completely free for 7 days. You can take a couple of lessons. You can do some practice questions from a question bank. Most importantly, you will understand what is your starting level, and that's going to help you study with a lot more focus. So I'd like now to pass control over to Nemas, who is going to share a little bit more about, well, first of all, how the business school look at the GMAT, and what else would you need to get in, because it's not really all about the GMAT. So Nemas, if you can now please unmute yourself and share some of the tips, some of the application tips.
Thank you very much, Sergey, and thank you for that very informative presentation. I think it was very helpful to a lot of folks. I'm just going to quickly go over what we do here at Hult and give you some admissions tips as well. At Hult, we have several programs. We have our global MBA program, and we also have 5 other master's programs, which are the Master of International Business, Marketing, Finance, Business Analytics, and Disruptive Innovation. We are a very multicultural and dynamic community at Hult. We have over 150 different nationalities represented in the student body, with over 90% of our students coming from the international community. No one international nationality represents more than 12% of the student body. Our MBAs have about 7 years of work experience on average, and the average age for the MBA is 31. Our master students are typically about 24 years old, and they have usually about 1 year of experience. Over 100 languages are spoken at Hult, so it is really a very dynamic and truly multicultural community. The Hult MBA program allows you to study in 3 different cities in one intense year. We have a campus in San Francisco, Dubai, London, Shanghai, Boston, as well as New York. In the 1 year at Hult, you can spend up to 4 months in in 2 different locations. We have a rotation program where you would spend 8 months at your home campus, last 4 months split into 2 months apiece, where you can then rotate to 2 additional campuses. Any combination that you can think of is quite possible with our global rotation, giving you knowledge of the nuances of doing business in a different city and a different country. So some GMAT requirements at Hult. So your GMAT score has to be valid. It has to be less than 5 years old. We do accept a range of scores. We accept both the GMAT and the GRE, and scores over 650 will be considered for academic excellence scholarships, and it's a great way to get a fantastic financial aid package. Show us your scores, speak to us about it, so that we can actually start working with you throughout the application process. At Hult, we have a very dynamic and very inclusive, holistic approach to how we review a application. So when you're considering applying to Hult, we use the Hult application method. Like I said, it's very holistic. So no one part of the application will outweigh another. First of all, we want to get to know you here at Hult. We want to know the candidates that are coming in. We want to know that you're going to fit into the community. So when you're looking at a holistic approach, you want to understand that the individual will be somebody who's going to gain a lot from the program and somebody who's going to be able to add a lot to the program. We consider your education, work history, professional references, your essays, and your GMAT scores, of course. But there's a lot of opportunity for you to shine. And the admissions process works in 2 different phases. We have the preliminary application phase where you activate your application. After you've activated your application, we require your support documentation. Then you will go through an admissions interview, and then we require your test scores. Throughout this entire process, you will have an enrollment manager and an enrollment director working with you, giving you application support. So it is a very involved and very transparent process here at Hult, where you know where you are with your application. So you won't simply just send it over and have no idea where you are. So some GMAT admissions tips. one of the things is folks, are typically a little weary of sending a GMAT score over to a school. What I want you to know that your enrollment director who will be assigned to you at Hult is not an admissions officer. So please share your scores with these individuals, because our primary function is to help and coach you throughout the entire application process. And we will advise you on next steps depending on your GMAT score. A high GMAT can surely compensate for weaknesses in your application, and so can other things attributes that you've achieved throughout your career. So please definitely connect with us so we can coach you throughout this process. And a low GMAT can be corrected, like I said, with other attributes that you can bring to the table. With regards to the actual test, take the practice test, see where you stand, get an idea of what you need to work on, and take it from there. Thank you very much to everybody. Sergey and I are going to be able to answer. I saw there's a lot of questions that came in. Keep typing your questions in, and we'll answer those questions as best as we can, so that we can cover everybody's questions.
Thanks very much, Nemas. And of course, we will follow up by email. You will have our contact information, both of our contact information. I just wanted to mention something. Many of you, when you were typing what score you would like to get, you mentioned that you would like to get the score in the 700s. Now, what do you think? To get a score in the 700s, would you need to do something different than if you were to get, let's say, 500 or 600? Really, you need to take a different approach. And if you would like to get a score this high, and a score of 700, just to give you an idea, is the top 11% of everybody who takes the test. So you essentially need to beat about 540,000 people, because you're competing with about 600,000 people who took this test in the last 3 years. And if you want a score of 750, then you need to be in the top 1 or 2%. So if you want to understand what would it take, and how could you get to a score this high, then please do reach out. Usually the best first step is to go online and take our test. Unless you've already taken the test, and if you can share the results with me, I'll be happy to connect with you personally. If you are located in New York City, Chicago, Toronto, and Montreal, please come and visit us in person. Connect with us first, and then we'll make sure that we can meet with you. You can come and take our class. You can also take our class anywhere in the world. Online, we have people taking our course in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. This course, again, is a lot of personal touch. You're going to get coaching as part of this course. Make sure that when you register and when we connect with you, that you quote this special code HULT 100. Now we can take a few questions, and we can really stay for as long as you need us to stay. Yeah, some of you mentioned, okay, you took Manhattan Prep and got 550. Well, if you would like to reach out and really learn where can you go from there, because you've learned a lot of very important foundations, but you may not have developed the right skills. So Dele, if you would like to reach out, please do, and we can give you some personalized advice. Okay, there's some other questions. I think there's a question to you, Nemas. What's the tuition, master's and MBA? I believe that the Hult website lists.
Yes, so the information for that is available on our website. Our different programs obviously are priced differently, so there's different tuition for the different programs, and it's also by campus. One of the things is I can take your name down, and I can surely send you the information straight to your email, and I'll be able to share with you what the cost of tuition is at the very different campuses, as well as the different programs, as well as the estimated living expenses in that city.
Mm-hmm. Grace was asking, what's the average score and what is considered a good score? Nemas, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so our average score at Hult is 610, and like I said, the way we approach the application process and admissions process at Hult is very holistic. So no one part of your application is going to outshine another, and certain things on your application can complement each other, right? So a high GMAT score will complement other opportunity areas on your application, and vice versa. So again, I implore you, please reach out to us. The enrollment directors here at Hult are going to help you, and we're going to coach you throughout the entire process. And we're going to help you present the best case you can to the admissions committee. We are not admissions.
Thank you very much, Nemas. Okay, so somebody was mentioned, I'm not going to say the name. Well, I wish I knew this before, then I wouldn't really fail on the GMAT. Well, there is no such thing as fail. The GMAT is, as you know, a score, and if you study and if you develop the right skills for the test, your score can only go up. And the best part about really focusing on developing skills as opposed to learning lots of content, which is what a lot of people are trying to do, is that not only learning skills is more enjoyable. Imagine you're a 5-year-old kid. These kids don't really read a book on how to play. They just play. They develop the skills. So not only it's more enjoyable, but it's something you can take away to other areas of your life. You will be more successful in a business school if you really take the time to learn how to think differently. We had one of our clients not too long ago went to Hult San Francisco campus, absolutely loved it. And she reached out to me around October, and the program started in September. She said that if I haven't studied for the GMAT, and it was very hard for her to study for the GMAT because it is a difficult exam, and we really put our clients to work. Like, you're gonna work very hard if you work with us. You will get very high results, but you will need to work very hard. We, like good coaches, we're going to try to push your limits so that you can really break through. And she said that if she hasn't gone through this process, she probably wouldn't have survived the program. It is a very intensive program. It's a 1-year program. You learn a lot, but it's a lot of work. But of course, you take your life to the next level.
Absolutely. So I see a question regarding how employers perceive a MBA degree from Hult as compared to Harvard and Stanford and Chicago and etc. So when you're looking at MBA programs, my advice to you, again, reach out to enrollment personnel so that your application doesn't just land on their desks, but also have a view and a look at what each program offers. There are a lot of great schools out there, and the only thing that I can tell you is that we can cater to what we do best here at Hult, which is international business, as well as having a very practical and very holistic approach to how we deliver that experience to you, right? So experiential learning is very, very important to Hult. If that's the way you like to learn, then we might be a fit for you. Let's start the conversation. I think that it is would be unfair, if you will, for me to start comparing all the different types of schools, because we offer different types of learning and different types of graduate programs in terms of how to deliver business to you. So if what we do and how we do it fits to what you're trying to achieve, then we're a fit. If another school teaches in a way that you you prefer to learn, then they're a fit to you. From an employer perspective, we've done incredibly over the last few years, with over 90% of our students being placed within 3 months. So in terms of perception, I think that it really depends on what you're going to get out of the program, is how you're going to be able to deliver on the other side of it. Employers look at our students and they do recognize that learning experience, that experiential learning experience that we give them at Hult gets them job ready. And so it's definitely well recognized by employers.
Exactly. And Nemas, like you said, it is really all about developing the skills. And one person was asking, how much does the GMAT truly translate to lifelong management skills? Well, it depends on how you prepare for it. If you prepare for it by just memorizing a lot of formulas, maybe it won't. But if you want to get a very high score, which what a lot of people want when they come to us, then we really break this down. And if you can think about this, and hopefully this is going to be helpful, your success on the GMAT consists of 3 parts. And you can kind of put it in 3 different buckets. The first 20% is to know certain formulas and certain concepts, mostly in math. The next 60% is about really having the right problem-solving abilities, the right way to think, the right way to approach the question. There's a very, very important skill that we call a gap analysis, where essentially you're saying, well, I know this, I need this. How do I get there? What's the gap? How can I connect the dots? Very, very important analytical skill. That's very relevant. Maybe the first 20%, maybe the formula on how to add two fractions, not that important, but this 60% very important. And the last 20% is really having the right frame of mind, the right psychology, the right approach, the right confidence. That's also something very important that you could use in all areas of your life, even in human relationships, even dating. Having, again, the right approach, the right confidence, that's also something that's very, very important. And on the GMAT, it's as important as knowing the formulas.
I see a question about having to leave work during the MBA program. So the MBA program at Hult is a full-time one-year MBA program. It is a full-time commitment. You would have to relocate to one of our 4 home campuses. And again, that is San Francisco, Boston, London, and Dubai. One of the things I do want you to consider when you are thinking of doing a full-time program like Hult, it is only 1 year, so your opportunity cost is significantly reduced, and you'll be back in the workplace in a limited amount of time. And then I have another question about job placement rate, starting salaries, and average payback period. So at Hult, our placement rate is 90% of our students are placed within 3 months of graduation. You will get career services support 3 months and before the program starts, and 3 months after the program starts. Average starting salary for an MBA graduate at Hult is $101,000 US. Of course, a lot of that depends on your salary pre-MBA, right? And the experience that you're bringing into the MBA program and the industry that you're going to after you graduate. And of course, we can have an in-depth discussion about that with each individual because everybody's different. The average payback period for the Hult MBA is about 2.5 years. So it is a considerably shorter amount of time that you're in school. That's less investment into the total investment into the MBA program, and that's you start earning return on it sooner rather than later because it's just that 1 year that you're out of the workplace. I see a question about internship placements and requirements. So an internship is not a requirement at Hult. It is something that is an option that is available to students. You can do that in lieu of electives. You will have support from our career services team, as I've mentioned before. However, the onus would be on the individual to find themselves a business-related internship, and it will have to be approved by the dean, and you can do that for credit. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, someone's asking if you can see alumni profiles. Absolutely, you can definitely see alumni profiles. There are testimonials available on our website at hult.edu. I also want to let you know that you can reach out to me directly, and I will send you, connect you with alumni that you can speak to. And another thing as well is you can just have a look at our alumni profiles on LinkedIn and get a sense of what our alumni are doing.
Yeah, and that's really something very, very important. If you are considering taking an MBA program, or even if you are considering taking a GMAT program, then you should really do a little bit of research. You go on a school's website. For example, if you go on the Hult's website, you can find contacts. You can ask to be connected with alumni, with current students, which is usually a very good idea. And the same you could do if you are approaching a GMAT preparation program. You can go on our website, you can see comments from past students, you can see video comments or text comments. So you really need to do a lot of research because it's really all about the right fit. And if you really liked or if something that we said today resonates with you, please do reach out to us. Our contact information is here at the bottom of the screen, sk@admitmaster.com. My contact information, nemas.nemakon@hult.edu. You can also go on our websites. We will follow up by email. You can respond back to us. Please don't be a stranger. Please reach out and we'll do the best to help you. Somebody was asking, where could you get a listing of all scholarships that apply to Hult? Again, it is listed on the website, I believe, Nemas, but you can also reach out to Nemas and he's going to put you in touch with the right people, and you can see all kinds of scholarships that are available. And Hult is really forthcoming when it comes to the admissions requirement. And we've had a lot of our students who went to Hult and a lot of other business schools as well, but we had some really amazing comments about the experience at Hult. One of our recent clients just finished the program in Hult Dubai, and she absolutely loved it. She said it was a life-changing experience, and I do not kid you, she sent me an email and she's saying going to Hult Dubai was the best decision she made so far in her life.
Yeah, and for any information, we'll be sending a Sergey keeps saying, we'll be sending a follow-up email to all the participants with the relevant contact information. Continue to ask your questions, reach out to us. We'll definitely get you connected with your right enrollment director, who will then start the process and the journey with you, and we'll help you out as best as we can. And like Sergey said, this is a very transparent admissions process that we have here at Hult. We are very hands-on, and you'll know where you are with your application throughout the entire process.
All right, I don't think we have any more questions, so please do reach out to us. Again, if you are in our cities, then please reach out. Please reach out to us by email. Please reach out to Nemas or reach out to Hult by email, online. And we wish you all the best. If there's anything we can do to help, we are here.
All right, yeah, thank you everybody for joining us this evening and for participating. Like I mentioned when we started, this was the verbal section. The math section, a link to that webinar will be available to you as well, as will this verbal section of the GMAT. Again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.